Starting July 21st, low-cost air company Eurowings will connect Düsseldorf with the Georgian capital Tbilisi. On Wednesdays and Sundays, the Airbus A320 will take off from the capital of North Rhine-Westphalia to Georgia. Return flights to Düsseldorf are also offered on Wednesdays and Sundays.
David Zedelashvili, law professor at the University of Georgia, told BMG that Georgian communications regulator falsely claims that they have a right to impose sanctions over Caucasus Online because the new owner of the company did not comply with its rules. Zedelashvili explains that the transaction between Nexol Holding and the former owner of the Caucasus Online was registered overseas by the foreign companies, and the Georgian regulator does not have an authority and jurisdiction on this transaction. In spite of this fact, GNCC has appointed a special manager in the company.
Fitch Ratings has revised TBC Leasing's outlook to stable from negative, while affirming the company's long-term issuer default rating at BB- and support rating at 3. The rating action followed the recent revision of the outlook on TBC's parent, TBC Bank, to stable from negative. The outlook change in TBC Bank reflects lower pressure from the pandemic and also the stabilization of the Georgian economy, which benefits the bank's credit profile and its ability to support TBCL.
About 1,000 Georgian home care specialists will be able to find legal employment in Israel. According to the agreement signed between the Georgian and Israeli governments, the registration of applicants will begin on April 12 on the Georgian Health Ministry portal. Successful candidates will be able to work legally in Israel for a one-year term. The monthly salary with a 42-hour work schedule per week will be 5,300 shekels, which equals to $1,600 as of the current exchange rate.
So this is the Checkpoints, hosted and co-authored by Elena Kvanchilashvili. Good to see you, Elena, and myself. I'm Georgi Sakadze. It is Sunday, and we have gathered here in Forbes Georgia studio to talk about business and economics.
Yes, we are ready at 10 p.m. sharp as usual and have a lot to share. Let's start with the latest IMF report on Georgia. The most influential financial institution just downgraded Georgia's economic growth outlook to 3.5%. We asked the IMF for reasons behind such downgrade, and here is the exclusive interview with Jihad Azur, responsible for the region's CCA. What does IMF's current outlook on Georgia's economic growth say about the state, the economic situation in Georgia?
Well, Georgia, like several other countries in the world and in the region too, was severely affected by the impact of the COVID-19 shock. First of all, because of the importance of the tourism sector, and also because of the open economy. And therefore, last year, Georgia had a negative growth of 6%, and we project this year a recovery of 3.5%. This year, the economy will recover thanks to the strong and sustainable measures that the government has introduced last year, both in order to protect the lives and the livelihoods of people through sanitary, fiscal, and monetary measures, to also provide a floor to the economy and support livelihood of people.
Since you're covering the region more broadly, how does Georgia's economic growth and the current outlook compare to that of its peers in the region?
Well, of course, countries are different. You have the oil exporting countries and the oil importing countries in Caucasus and Central Asia. Oil exporting countries who had sufficient buffers were able to use those buffers to reduce the magnitude of the shock. And this year are benefiting from the recovery in oil price. Georgia, compared to the oil importing countries, is faring relatively well. First of all, still enjoy a good level of fiscal buffer. and also has introduced certain number of measures that provided support to the private sector in terms of lending, in terms of easing interest rate, allowed the exchange rate to help reducing the impact of the shock on the Georgian economy. Of course, those measures provided the capacity to Georgia to address one of the most challenging crises for decades in a way that protected lives, protected livelihoods, and provided support to the overall Georgian economy.
Since you mentioned very rightfully that Georgia is an oil importer country, what kind of weight can lari devaluation have, and what kind is it a downside risk, so to say, to the Georgia's economic outlook?
Well, Georgia has made certain number of important reforms in the past to improve macroeconomic management and to strengthen the fundamentals of the Georgian economies. And thanks to those reforms, Georgia was able to use different tools and economic toolkit to reduce the impact of the crisis, ranging from the fiscal support that has been provided to the financial support, and also using the monetary policy wisely in order to reduce the impact and the challenge that the crisis had on Georgian economy.
Since you mentioned the monetary policy of Georgia, we see that the rest of the world is more on easing the monetary policy, while here in Georgia, the policy is becoming stricter and stricter. And the main one of the main reasons for that is lari devaluation and its spillover effect on prices in general, meaning inflation. Do you think stricter monetary policy has also, which is necessary in Georgia, unfortunately, has also its toll on economic growth?
I would say the contrary. Each country is different, and it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act between different challenges and also using different instruments. Of course, when you have an economy where the tourism sector play an important role, and where the exchange, both in goods and services, are with some important trade partners, it's very important to adjust your policies to your context. And I think Georgia, over the last 12 months, was able, on one hand, to protect the economic stability, and on the other hand, to provide the necessary support, both to the corporate sector and also to the population through fiscal measures as well as also financial sector measures that were implemented by the central bank in order to preserve stability, but at the same time to provide protection to the population.
What impact does the pace of vaccination have on the outlook concerning economic growth in Georgia and also in the region? In Georgia, we now see that the pace is slowly picking up, but it is still way behind the plan that we have, the national vaccination plan.
Vaccination is an important element in the recovery this year. It helps protect lives, but also it helps the economy to recover faster. Our studies are showing at the regional level that countries who are able to accelerate vaccination will enjoy higher level of growth. Vaccination is an important economic tool as well as it's an important public health priority. We are encouraging countries to accelerate vaccination and also to diversify the sources of vaccines. This also will allow an economy like the Georgian economy, where services, tourism in particular, play an important role, to reactivate those sectors and to normalize further the operation of those sectors. Georgia has also certain number of buffers that maybe others don't have, and we're encouraging the authorities to maintain the approach that they have been using over the last few months in, on one hand, maintaining the stability that is an important anchor to the medium-term recovery, but also the measures that they have already been introduced.
Besides the tourism sector and services, which play a major role in Georgia's economy, as you have also mentioned, what are some other drivers of economic growth looking forward?
Global economy is changing after the COVID-19 crisis. We see new corridors in terms of trade in goods and services. We see potentials of new partnerships. Europe is investing in a strong recovery that is expected to be a green recovery. This offers an opportunity for neighboring countries like Georgia to benefit from that. Technology has played an important role during this crisis, and this is a sector that Georgia can use to accelerate the recovery going forward. Georgia is at a crossroad between different big economic corridors, and definitely this could be an opportunity in terms of logistics, in terms of certain number of new services that they have emerged. But also, Georgia is in a region that in going through some challenges, and some of those challenges have naturally an impact on the economic performance of Georgia.
Thanks to IMF and other international financial institutions and donors, Georgia has secured a sufficient amount of support to fight COVID-19. But what does this new benchmark of economic growth and new outlook for economic growth say? Do you think Georgia might need more financial, even more financial resources to keep economy going?
Well, as you know, the IMF support to Georgia was to back a reform program that the Georgian government has implemented. And we extended the duration of the program for one additional year with that. Very recently, we have reached a staff-level agreement with Georgia, with the Georgian authorities, which concluded the last review of the program successfully. And this review has been approved by our board. And therefore, now Georgia has graduated from the current program. And it depends on the reform agenda of the government. And if the Georgian authorities are interested in a new partnership with the fund will stand ready for that.
Yes, thank you for that. And since you mentioned reforms, considering the global economic new kind of structure that we might have after this pandemic, in the post-pandemic era, what would you name as main kind of reforms or as targets to the reforms for Georgia as well? Because due to this political polarization in Georgia, we have already seen that, for example, for the EU support for COVID-19 for Georgia, we already see some conditionalities, and these conditionalities lie through the reforms, reaching the goals of the reforms that have been set, including IMF as well, because we see their courts reforms, we see their reforms on state-owned enterprises, the directions that IMF has been working with Georgia for years now.
Well, going forward, the priorities are to anchor the recovery on strong footing and exit as fast as possible the COVID-19 crisis. Acceleration of vaccination, strengthening the healthcare infrastructure is an important step. Pursue what has been done in terms of structural reforms to allow the economy to grow faster, reforming SOEs, improving financial inclusion, increasing the role of the private sector in the recovery, addressing the issue of infrastructure in order to strengthen the linkages between Georgia and its neighboring economy and benefit from the global value chain. This also will help diversify and grow the size of the economy. Last but not the least, still Georgia is a country that need to pursue macroeconomic stability policies by maintaining the level of deficit under control, by maintaining the level of inflation also under control, and keep the flexibility that exists in the monetary policy to anchor the monetary policy on inflation targeting and give it additional credibility. Those are the reforms that Georgia could use in order to benefit from this important moment, that it's not only a shock in itself, but also it's an opportunity to build forward better, to build an economy that is stronger, and also to build a social system that provide broader social protection and increase the level of fairness and the level of social inclusion.
After this in-depth analysis of Georgia's current economic trends, I think it's time to turn to our relatively new, but already a traditional rubric, Industrial Review Outlook a bit. This time, our senior reporter, Anita Vadze, focused on main figures for the medical industry. Here is our review outlook for the checkpoints.
The year 2020 was a tough one for the pharma sector, from shortages of necessary equipment and medicine to the unforeseeable price adjustments due to lack of stability of the lari exchange rate. The sector found itself on the front line of the fight against coronavirus. One of the first ones to take the hit were pharmacies. There are three main players in the Georgian pharmacy market: PSP, Aversi, as well as GPC and Pharma Depot, which are both part of the Georgian healthcare group. So, let's take a look at the public information about their incomes of previous years. According to the public information on revenues for 2019, GPC has the largest pharmacy network, which operates 296 pharmacies across the country. Aversi network with 268 pharmacies is in the second place, and PSP network with 235 pharmacies is in the third place. In addition to pharmacies, these companies are also actively represented in the wholesale market of pharmaceutical products. They serve various clinics and take up state orders. According to the financial statements, the total revenue of all three companies in 2019 amounted to 1.5 billion lari. Among them, GPC is in the first place in terms of sales volume and net profit. Revenue of GPC and Pharma Depot in 2019 amounted to 611.8 million lari, while net profit stood at 51.6 million lari. For PSP, revenue in 2019 was 499.6 million lari, while net profit was 26.3 million lari. Aversi's revenue in 2019 stood at 335.5 million lari, while net profit amounted to 3.1 million lari. In 2020, the pharma sector faced a tough challenge. Perhaps the most important factor, the uninterrupted supply of medicines, face masks, and disinfectants to the citizens, was their responsibility. The first months of the pandemic were especially complicated due to the catastrophic shortage of these products on the world market, which was eliminated in May 2020 due to the stabilization of local production. There were deficits in certain products due to increased demand. We were able to bring in as many of these products as possible and thus eliminate the deficit. In the first stage of the onset of the pandemic, there was a shortage of face masks and hand sanitizers. The demand for these products could not have been calculated accordingly. Therefore, companies didn't have the appropriate amount of these products in stock. However, after increased demand, we tried and eliminated the mentioned deficit.
Our main goal was to make sure that the country had enough medicines. Therefore, the supply of necessary medications was a top priority. The main task was to set up an effective logistic chain. In the conditions of complicated production and complicated supply, we had to collect enough supplies.
Most companies voiced their concerns about the frightening lack of stability of the lari exchange rate, which puts the issue of maintaining prices and possible price adjustments at the center of discussion. As the executive director of the Association of Pharmaceutical Companies Representatives in Georgia tells us, the structure of the medicines sold changed.
Sales of prescription medicines increased for 8%. And what this information give us, it gives the idea that the people were buying more medicines for some complicated cases. So, and we can think that some people were buying medicines they created some kind of stocks. The sales of the medicines manufactured locally has been decreased by 14%, and imported medicines has been increased for 4%. And transportation cost was increased drastically. When there's a limitation on the flight possibilities and transportation possibilities, the transporting companies, they increase the price, and Georgian local distributor companies, they try to avoid the price increase in the pharmacies. And if you add on this problem another problem, which is the devaluation of the local currency, and of course the local distributor companies, they try just to maintain some kind of prices which shall be affordable for the population, and it's impossible to completely stay on the same level because devaluation still continues.
As we said, the main challenge of the companies is the volatility of the lari exchange rate, which is why most of them do not rule out price adjustments in 2021 and in the future.
75% of our products are imported. Therefore, we are very dependent on Georgian lari exchange rate. So despite our great desire to maintain prices, the sharp rise of the euro and the dollar does not allow us to do so. It will remain a challenge. Unfortunately, the volatility of the Georgian lari exchange rate will lead to price adjustments.
Some of the problems of the pharma sector that became visible during last year weren't necessarily the unique outcomes of the pandemic, but rather an extension of the already existing problems within the sector. So what are the issues connected to manufacturing practices and supply technicalities that the pandemic enhanced or helped better demonstrate?
Many different importers, even some physical persons, can import the medicines. And sometimes the importation of the medicine by this way replace the regular supply of the medicines, supply from the manufacturer till the Georgia. But pandemic situation, when all the borders been closed, this kind of supply became a big problem. And it's not easy again switch to the regular supply because it's a little bit complicated system, the manufacturing and the forecasting on the medicines manufacturing. So in that case, we had some cases when we had a shortage of the important drugs, like some oncology drugs, etc. And these cases show the problem that whenever some regular supply is replaced some alternative way, it can be very interesting and attractive from the financial point of view. But it can make a very negative impact on very essential thing like a continuous supply of the medicine. The local manufacturing, drugs manufactured locally has been decreased. Why? First of all, because the local manufacturing standards are not yet in compliance with the international standards, are not in compliance and are not matching the so-called good manufacturing practice standards, which is already exist in Georgia. This we call it GMP, Good Manufacturing Practice Standards, and since 2019 we have it on place, but it's on the initial stage, and some local manufacturers need to switch to those standards. It means a lot of investments because its technical equipment has to be renovated, replaced. It's a huge investment, but this process on the initial stage. And again, the situation shows we definitely need the local manufacturing much better and much higher quality.
The year 2020 was a challenging one. However, the expectations and efforts for 2021 are directed towards stabilization, not only in the pharma sector, but in all others. So we shall wait and see how the sectors manage to recover and deal with the upcoming challenges.
Elena, listening and watching this overview, I remembered your editor's note for BMG English edition, which focused readers' attention on pharma business in Georgia. I think it would be useful if you told us more about the segment of broader sectors that we have just reviewed for our viewers and followers.
Thank you, Georgi. One of the main promises of Irakli Garibashvili before the parliament that had granted him the mandate and the status of the Prime Minister of Georgia for the second term was to put special emphasis on the issue of regulating medicine prices and curb the over-profits of the medical companies. On February 22 plenary session, then still Prime Minister to be Garibashvili assured the chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Health and Social Issues to come back to the main legislative body with specific regulatory initiatives in the format of the working group. I'm interested if we can adopt EU rules on regulating medicine prices, Garibashvili said. Let us note here, Georgi, that today there is much more transparency in this sector in Georgia, and Saras.g is a very good source of information on those companies that have opened up their financial data. So today the discourse on pricing and profits doesn't have to be based only on perceptions. The pharmaceutical companies that have made their figures publicly available, and these are PSP, Aversi, and GEFA, represent the largest companies on the market and comprise at least its 70%. Here are the main charts we can follow to see the whole picture. Chart number 1. The three main components have the highest contribution to the overall revenues. This is net cost, salaries and other benefits, and rent. What you can also see on the chart on your screens is the net profit in 2019, and that is the latest data which is fully open to this day, which amounts to 5.6% down from the previous year. Chart number 2. Let us compare Georgia with other similar players on three markets, that is US, UK and Russia. What we see on this chart is that on the Georgian market, net profit margins of the three largest players are closer to that of Super Drugstore, which is the highest in our sampling. Chart number 3. Let us now examine how the picture changes if we compare profit tax margins, but this time before taxes and extra charges. This chart clearly tells us that the tax system of Georgia seems to be one competitive advantage for the companies. Georgia practices a so-called Estonian model of the profit tax, which means that reinvested profit is free of tax, which definitely eases the tax burden on the sector. Chart number 4. Let us now focus on markup. This chart seems very straightforward. From the consumer standpoint, these three largest players, Aversi, PSP and GEFA, do not seem to act dishonestly on the market. Chart number 5. Now let us examine the tendency of out-of-pocket payments. In 2019, more than half of the respondents of this research said that in the last 6 months, out-of-pocket payments at medical institutions have grown. Looking at the last 3 waves, the number of respondents mentioning this tendency of growth has stayed consistent. One reason for this may be the changes that have been made to the design of the universal healthcare system in May 2017 for the system to run to a more targeted approach. Benefit packages for some groups have been differentiated at that point. Some groups have been restricted from some services. Chart number 6. You have already seen this chart, but let us remind ourselves that the net cost is central to the structure of revenues of pharma sector in Georgia. And let us remind ourselves that the largest share of medicine in Georgia is imported. So here is an interactive chart number 7. What this visualization means in practice is that if in 2018 the medicine you needed cost say €10, in 2021, only because of the devaluation of the local currency, it already costs you 10 lari more the least. The logic is the same for the trend in USD. How does this picture tie into the public perceptions? Well, here is the chart number 8. We can clearly see that the majority of respondents of the study identify the increasing tendency in the medicine prices since 2015. This is the first year that the USD exchange rate stepped over the psychological benchmark, and for the first time we saw 2 on the USD side of the equation. Georgi, let me just briefly summarize all these 8 main charts to avoid any misunderstanding. Do I like the high prices of medicine? No. Do I like seeing my mom suffering from underdeveloped insurance services and having to nag the company for the reimbursement? Of course not. But do I blame only the private sector for high-end out-of-pocket payments and prices? No, because I understand that be it prices on medicine or profits of business, it's just one piece of the bigger puzzle. In the end, the way out lays through our enrichment and not through the impoverishment of the business, because the poor business then won't be able to deliver on such contributions as the second largest slice in this pie, which is salaries and other benefits of the employees, what we see on the last chart for today.
Yes, we do love charts and leaderboards, especially at Forbes Georgia, as Forbes Georgia team and pharma industries worldwide do have billionaires that sit on different Forbes lists. Anyway, we can offer our viewers a Forbes teaser so that you stay updated and tuned, by the way, including on main ratings of main industries in Georgia and beyond.
Quiet, problem-oriented and a positive banker. This is how the April Forbes main character, Giorgi Tkhelidze, is characterized by the executive editor of publication, Elena Guangelashvili. Tkhelidze is a remarkably interesting, positive respondent for business media. How the corporate direction of one of the country's systemic banks is managed, what challenges have been dealt with, and what still remains in pandemic reality. CEO of TBC has in-depth answers to these and many other questions. We plan to talk to Giorgi Tkhelidze about many other interesting topics in the future in our various formats. But before that, we offer you his history as a leader and many other interesting topics in the April edition of Forbes Georgia.
Bitcoin is not money yet. Wondering when Bitcoin will replace money? You will find the answers in the author column of Steve Forbes. In the April issue, you will meet the top earners in the NBA, where the leader is LeBron James. And Aliko Dangote explains the ranking of the richest people in Africa with assets worth $12 billion, $100 million. In 2020, the assets of Georgian banks exceeded the size of the country's economy and amounted to 56 billion 800 million lari. At the top of the list is TBC Bank, followed by the second giant, Bank of Georgia. What is needed to increase Georgia's energy independence? GNERC member Maya Melikidze, who is the author of the several books on renewable energy, considers one of the solutions to increase the rate of green energy use. She talks to Forbes Georgia about the topic in detail. We will tell you about another reliable partner in the new issue. Giorgi Archvadze, the head of the GGRC team, talks about the challenges in the field of medical management and effective models of clinic management. Why and at whose expense are interest rates on deposits reduced? Roman Gotsiridze summarizes the topic in the author's column with figures and specified facts. Perhaps you're wondering what the Georgian healthcare sector looks like in numbers and how we can take bold steps for economic development. Traditionally, the main questions in the April issue of Forbes are answered by the Forbes Health platform. For many more insights into the most important business and economic affairs, read Forbes Georgia.
And Giorgi, before we move on, let me mention here my favorite project, 30 Under 30, and the big award ceremony that is approaching us. We can say that the jury is picking the winners basically as we speak here, and we will soon know more about those 30 names that will sit on the 2021 list of 30 Under 30. Here is a brief teaser for you. Enjoy.
Forbes 30 Under 30 is an important nomination for the country and for the people who are being nominated and have been nominated before. The main reason I think is that, especially if you are from Georgia and you are marketing yourself to the wider world and taking into account the fact that a lot of people not even know where is Georgia, right? Usually, like in many countries. And then you go there and on your profile it's written that you have been selected as a Forbes Under 30 Under 30 nominee and have been selected in the list. It's kind of putting you as a person that has already been selected by various people, and here you are, right? So it kind of gives you this special promotion that gives you wider access to more people, to more investors in other worlds.
For me, 30 Under 30 is one of the best projects which allows young generation to present themselves. It also gives the opportunity to present their own businesses locally as well as globally, and gives them much more motivation to do more and more for their own businesses as well as the country prosperity. I think 30 Under 30 is a project which also motivates and gives more responsibility to every and single participant. I could proudly say that it's a second time that I'm the member of jury, and it's getting harder and harder to choose to squeeze the nomination and choose the best candidate out of best. So I think that these people and the community who are applying for 30 Under 30 is the future of Georgia. In their hand, I see the country's development, also promotion of Georgia worldwide, and I think that this project also motivates to bring new entrants into the ecosystem where we exist. So this is a best project, and I wish all candidates one day to be on a Forbes cover.
It is a huge support from world-renowned Forbes to support young entrepreneurs as well as scientists from Georgia for everyday work they are engaged in, and it is at the same time incentivizing for them, and it incentivizes to create more value for the society. And as a nominee of 2020 list, it helped me in terms of awareness of our company and our work we are engaged in. I'm really proud that I'm part of this whole process, and especially in the category of scientists, because nowadays, after a pandemic year of 2020, technology and science is more and more necessary, and needs more scientists and more people to be engaged in these fields.
I think that getting into the list of under 30 is very motivating for young adults, not only for those who earned their place on the list, but also for those who are not on the list, because they still see that people their age can and are succeeding. In my opinion, it is essential to advance two major areas in the country. First, education, and second, commitment to work. We talk a lot about ideas, we talk a lot about what we want to do, but we rarely do what needs to be done. So this list will be another driving force for a new generational wave of people in action.
ძალიან პრესტიჟულია, როდესაც ესეთი გამოცემა გაფასებს.
It is very prestigious when a publication like Forbes appreciates individuals' work. Individuals' careers flourish after being listed in such ratings. This list is also crucial for the motivation and professional advancement of young people. Being a part of Under 30 serves as a business card of the future. The young generation in Georgia is unique. They have different views on everything. They need support in everything that they do. They need to be actively promoted for the work that they do to help them get closer to the rest of the world.
Such a nice bridge from young names to an international well-renowned brands. I mean Tbilisi Marriott, Courtyard Marriott, and Moxie Tbilisi, of course. The checkpoints had the chance to sit down for an interview with the general manager of these three brands operating in Georgia and enjoying a huge popularity among foreign and local tourists. I think it is important to listen carefully to Cameron McNeil. He is GM of Marriott International in Georgia, and we offer the interview right now. Great to host you.
Thank you very much for having me, George.
Forbes office, I know, actually Forbes is always at Marriott, but right now you are with us. So
it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Pleasure is all mine. Share us a bit experience, which is, well, actually nothing positive, mostly in this, but both of us as a representative of the global brands, we need to be in charge of the domestic local details and at the same time how our headquarters were orchestrating this so-called unprecedented period called pandemic.
I think you used the word correctly there, George, unprecedented. For all of us, it's something we've never experienced in our lifetimes, and you know, God willing, we never have to again.
Amen.
It's something that I think, if I'm honest, probably caught everybody by surprise in the beginning, the way things happened so quickly with a pandemic. If I take my mind back to January last year, business was looking okay and things were looking fine. Within 8 weeks, suddenly everything was collapsing. The pandemic was on our doorstep within the world, but of course within Georgia. We saw as a business locally, you know, you're right, we are an international global organization. Marriott International is the largest hotel company in the world with over 7,500 hotels. I represent, as you know, the three hotels within Tbilisi. And, you know, worldwide as a company, we saw revenues fall between 90 and 98%. There's a lot of people that are affected by that. Staff, owners, investors.
All of them.
Everybody has been affected one way or the other, financially, physically, mentally, you know, and the mental strain has taken its toll on a lot of people because people around the world have lost jobs, of course, and it's really put a burden on people's livelihoods. I think it's important that we look at the global organization of Marriott and how they reacted. And one of the quickest...
Can you remember the first message, call? I don't know. You do have a lot of internal chats.
We do, and the first message probably started around about the end of January, saying, oh, you know, in China we seem to have this virus, and we're closing a few hotels. And then the ball started rolling a lot quicker, and it just escalated from there. Suddenly, cancellations came flooding in through the world. Marriott International were very quick to respond in terms of putting protocols in place. How are we going to react? If it's a closure, we have to put in new protocols. Cleanliness standards are changing. Throughout the globe, we have fantastic cleanliness program. But I think it's got even better because we've had to. We've had to put in different measures. The Global Cleanliness Council through Marriott gives weekly updates on new initiatives, potentially new chemicals we can use, electric static sprayers within hotels, because it's giving the customer a peace of mind.
All this stuff was overviewed. I mean, this protocol. Do you remember approximate date when the protocols were finalized, which was like guideline already for you? It was February?
I would say February, March, yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Because
that's quick?
Very quick. But in an organization like this, we have so many stakeholders, we have to act so quickly. You know, and if we don't, there becomes firstly, miscommunications, and also lack of confidence. And as a company globally, we want to make sure that we instill the right confidence to all of our customers. They want to know if they go stay at any one of our 31 brands around the world, they are going to get what the brand recommends and promises.
3 hotels in Georgia, 3 leader hotels in Georgia, let me say so, and at the same time, government on the other side, which is locally orchestrating so-called lockdowns, permissions and things like that. How well expected and coordinate all these efforts were for you to make as much predictable the situation as you can?
That's a great
question. Were you in a good coordination?
Yes.
Wow.
To answer you bluntly, I think honestly, it's been very difficult for any government, not just Georgia, any government to predict what's going
in this world.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I look at my own country in the UK that went through a lot of turmoil before they even got vaccinations. But we were communicated weekly, monthly basis. Also in relations with the GNTA, the Tourism Administration, who were doing a great job in updating us all the time. And also we had an open line of communication to the different ministries, Also providing expertise from Marriott International and our suggestions at the very beginning. One thing I was very encouraged at the very start of this pandemic is that the government were open to listening to businesses, specifically in the hospitality sector. And that is continuing. Yesterday I had a meeting with the Deputy Economy Minister. Okay. And, it's very encouraging. They're still listening to ideas and suggestions. Of course, not everything's going to be implemented. I understand that. But certain things that we spoke about at the very beginning, we could see being implemented. And yeah, it's been very tough for everybody. Lockdowns, restrictions, curfews, it's difficult for businesses and continues to be so.
You mentioned about your homeland, UK, and we all know that UK is also not an exemption within the world through these waves. We're talking about the vaccination later on, but at the same time, what do you think? Do we have sort of message from hospitality sector, like worldwide brand Marriott International can advise and share with the decision makers, I'm saying, in regards of government, UNCA and others, what you mentioned, Ministry of Economy, how we can make more simplified decision in this regards, because it's over 450 days that we have pandemic situation worldwide. We are adapted more or less. We know where we are, but at the same time we do not. So if there is some sort of recipe how we can move forward.
I strongly am an advocate of the vaccination process.
Same here.
From what I've seen, great. I also understand that people are fearful of vaccinations for stories and.
Were you lucky to take your jab? Or?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No, not yet. Probably, I'm still young enough at the moment, but I don't fall in the category just yet. But when it's available, yes, I will take it. When you look at the data, the scientific data, that's what I go on. Marriott Corporation, for instance, is advocating the vaccination for its associates worldwide. And every country is different at the different stages, of course. And as we know in Georgia, the vaccination program has just begun. And we're very encouraged to see it happening. Obviously, I hope that a lot of my associates and a lot of people within Georgia take the vaccination. And here's the reason why. Hospitality is one of our main drivers in this economy in Georgia. I kind of consider myself a little bit Georgian now after being here for almost 4 years, because I dearly love this country, and it's given me a lot in the almost 4 years here. And I think the country has come so far in terms of tourism and the way it's adapted that it would be a shame to see it falter right now. Obviously, we have political challenges currently, and I'm sure that will be overcome in the future, we hope. But in terms of the vaccine, to make tourists feel confident, as I mentioned earlier, it's coming back in. They want to see people vaccinated. Frontline workers, taxi drivers at the airport, for instance, or bus drivers, or people checking them in, or people serving in the restaurants. If there's a program in place for frontline people as well as healthcare professionals, it'll give that confidence of people coming back into the country.
Can we work out a sort of message? Where do we stand in 2021? I'm talking about Marriott International Georgia. What's your daily job right now? We are open. We have guests. We can see some tourists on streets already. It's getting warmer.
Absolutely.
So something is moving forward. Little by little, we're getting more vaccinated.
Yeah, I think there's a few key things here. The weather is changing, which is fantastic. Yes, we're seeing more flights coming now into the country, which is good. So a lot more air borders are being opened for passengers coming into Georgia.
The occupation is improving.
The occupancy levels are going up marginally. They're still, of course, they're not going to be. Quite candidly, we don't see occupancy levels of the 2019 level probably till the end of 22, 23, maybe even 24. There's a lot of factors, of course, whether it's political, vaccination process, vaccination passports, but we're seeing slow marginal increase at the moment. And as you alluded to, we're seeing a lot more tourists on the streets at the moment, which is very encouraging. But it's this confidence. As a country, we need to deliver the confidence to travelers coming into Georgia to experience, whether it be Batumi, Kakheti, whatever the region they want to visit, and Tbilisi. We want them to come with absolute confidence that it's a safe, clean environment for them to relax.
That's the biggest challenge.
And spend their money. I think it's a big challenge. I don't think it's surmountable that we can't get the message across to them. And again, I know GNTA are working very, very hard and diligently to get that message across, specifically to countries that are our demographic that we want to attract in as soon as possible.
Very good. Thank you so much, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, George.
Georgi, talking of hotels and tourists, the checkpoints checked on Fadi Asli, who has a relatively new status now. He's in charge of the whole region at ICC. So we sat down with him for an interview focusing on ICC's endeavors in terms of supporting tourism worldwide and drawing FDI among some other topics, which we can get to know right now. I haven't had the chance to congratulate you on that. Now you're covering Caucasus and the whole region.
Asia.
Yes, the whole Central Asia. How would you compare Georgia, how it's doing to minimize this uncertainty that that COVID-19 has brought to the region and to the Georgia as well?
You know, I mean, it's the same problem everywhere. It's not only Georgia. I mean, all the countries everywhere are suffering. Some countries are a little more flexible than others, but still, you know, people are avoiding to travel. There are complications. You need to do PCR tests, have vaccinations. It's the same everywhere. So yes, I mean, now we have Sophie Bokuchava, who was the ICC Secretary General previously. She's now the region coordinator. And she's based in Tashkent. And from Tashkent, we are covering the other countries of Central Asia.
So what are the main issues facing the region right now? And
I'll tell you now, our
challenges?
aim is to open the ICCs everywhere, in every country to open an ICC. Now, the issue is that everyone is looking for investments. Everyone is looking for investors. And every country is coming with like incentives and schemes to encourage investors. So there is a huge battle to attract investment in all the countries of the region, including Ukraine as well. When I think of Georgia, I think that Georgia really needs to make a huge effort and to change attitude. Because, you know, I mean, Georgia is like my baby. This is how I feel. And when I see the potential in the country and I see the reluctancy of the government to encourage foreign investors to save the economy, because nothing is going to save the economy besides foreign investment in the country. Real foreign investment, not reinvestments or Georgian companies domiciliated in other countries who are investing here. No, real foreign investments. So the government really needs to change attitude. They wanted foreign investors from the city of Lyon in France and north. They didn't want anyone south the city of Lyon coming to Georgia. And unless they change attitude, it's going to be, we're going to struggle a lot because there is a lot of competition.
I remember ICC had two very important initiatives. One was directed towards a freer movement of tourism. You were looking some app or some kind of the same rules for all the countries. Where did this initiative go? Do you have?
I'll tell you, we have an app that is a co-venture between the ICC and two private companies that is called the AOK Pass. This means all okay, AOK. And with this app, whenever you have a PCR, for example, or a certificate of vaccination, it gets into the system through blockchain. And whenever you reach a border somewhere, you have it on your phone. And there is a code, and it's scanned, and automatically you're let in. The issue was that to make sure that people who are traveling before they take the plane are healthy. because you know the problem is that many people take the plane, they don't have a PCR, then they reach destination, and then they do a PCR at destination. But what if they are positive, you see? So that is the concept, and it started like in France, in Italy, in several countries. It's widely used now by the airlines.
Are you working with Georgian government
we
also?
inform the Georgian government, but you know the Georgian government have other priorities now. So I mean, it was maybe a little complicated for them, and so we're taking our time for it. We're not really pushing.
And another initiative was also with the arbitration court,
Yes.
ICC arbitration court coming to
Yes,
Georgia.
we were very enthusiastic about this. This was before we started the process a long time ago, but in 2017, we were engaged with the Minister of Justice, Mr. Lukiani, at the time, and the government was very excited about it. And they signed a memorandum of understanding with the ICC Arbitration Court in Paris in 2018, December 2018, based on which the ICC Arbitration Court was willing to open a branch here. After that, you know, there were, you know, the situation in Georgia, what happened with the courts, very high-profile cases of businesses that were defrauded by the courts. And honestly, I got discouraged myself, and I didn't push it anymore. We just organized one training of judges. There was an ICC team that came here and trained the judges regarding arbitration, and the private sector as well. But I thought that the time was not appropriate for it. That's why I did not push. Now, if there is a change of attitude from the government, and they're really determined to fix things, then I'll be very happy to push for it, and I think that we can make it happen.
But the situation changed now because we see that in order for Georgia to get part of the tranche of for fighting COVID-19, European Union told the Georgian government that there will appear some conditionalities to that tranche, and one of them is reforming courts and also reforming state-owned enterprises and a lot of, but one central point of it is reforming courts.
To implement the Venice Commission recommendations. Yeah, and I think this is very good, and I think it should be more widespread. It is very regrettable that the Georgian government is treated like a third grader at school. I felt a little humiliated, to be very honest with you, when I saw the EU doing this. As a Georgian, I felt humiliated because, you know, this means that they really look at us like incapable of doing the right thing for our own country.
Today we hear talks about further lockdown and the third wave of COVID-19. Do you think Georgia can sustain any large-scale or full-scale lockdown? And what is your point on like point restrictions?
I'll tell you, to sustain, we can sustain anything. I mean, we can be under a nuclear attack, okay? I mean, there will always be survivors. But the issue is what would be the cost? You know that already the cost for the economy has been terrible in 2020. Our GDP, nominal GDP in dollars, decreased by 9.1% between 2020 and 2019. And technically, end of 2020, our GDP, nominal GDP in dollar, is at the level, is 3.6% lower than 2012. This means after 8 years, we are poorer than we were as a country as we were in 2012. Already the first 3 months of the year 2021 were very difficult. We are negative and will be in dollar much more negative than what we saw in lari, I mean the GDP in lari. So of course, if they're going to lock down, there will be tens of thousands who will lose their jobs. A lot of businesses that will close this time because, you know, many businesses are standing on the edge after 2020. I mean, those who didn't close are on the verge of bankruptcy. And now will we be destroyed? We will not be destroyed because, you know, we will at one stage stand on our feet, but it will take years to do so. And while the rest of the world is moving quickly, we are like, going centimeter by centimeter. And that's a real tragedy.
Would you say that vaccination should be the main priority of this government at this point?
Vaccination is the key to a normal life again. And it's regrettable that the government did not advertise vaccination the proper way. It's very regrettable that there was this allergic reaction with this lady who deceased, unfortunately, the very first day of the vaccination, and it had a terrible ripple effect on the population. They were very scared, and I understand them. But the government needs to explain to people that they have 350 times more chances choking, dying while eating their food than dying from vaccination. And I got vaccinated, one of the very first Georgians to get vaccinated, and I think everyone needs to get vaccinated because the risks of getting vaccinated are nothing compared to the risk of catching the virus. And unless everyone is vaccinated, or at least 70% of the population is vaccinated, we will be condemned to remain poor for a very long period of time because businesses will be closed all the time with lockdowns, there will be curfews. We have to get vaccinated, okay? We have to get vaccinated. It's a necessity, and the government needs to do a lot of PR regarding this matter to explain to people that they will not die from vaccination. I mean, the chances to die from vaccinations are 1 in 1 million.
And my last question, not to leave everything so dark and negative mood, what could be the opportunities, not right now, but maybe when time passes, what are some of the lessons that Georgia can learn out of this pandemic?
Look, I mean, we all know that Georgia has a huge potential. We know that Georgia is the entry gate for the Caucasus and Central Asia. We know that the country is very beautiful. The people are hospitable. The opportunities in tourism are incredible. In the financial sector, they're incredible. In logistics, they are incredible. So the country has a fantastic potential, and that's why I'm always very angry, because I see this potential and I see how people in power put their own interests ahead of the interests of the country and of the citizen. So if finally the government will wake up, or we will have another government that would take responsibility and that would put the interests of the country ahead of their own interests, I think that Georgia can grow very quickly, very quickly. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we have 10% growth a year in dollars, not in lari. So there is this potential. All that we need are people who care for the country and competent people.
The last point in this interview, Elena, the main focus of Forbes Georgia Health Platform as well, the need for vaccination and the informational campaign on different vaccines. Here is a latest video from the World Health Organization, which will show us why we can't actually compare vaccines.
This is the new one-dose COVID-19 vaccine from Johnson & Johnson. In early March, more than 6,000 doses were supposed to be shipped to the city of Detroit, Michigan. But the mayor said no thanks.
Moderna and Pfizer are the best, and I am going to do everything I can to make sure the residents of the city of Detroit get the best.
He was referring to these numbers, the vaccine's efficacy rates. The vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna have super high efficacy rates, 95 and 94%. But Johnson & Johnson, just 66. And if you only look at these numbers, it's natural to think that these vaccines are worse than these. But that assumption is wrong. These numbers are arguably not even the most important measure of how effective these vaccines are. To understand what is, you first have to understand what vaccines are even supposed to do. A vaccine's efficacy rate is calculated in large clinical trials, when the vaccine is tested on tens of thousands of people. Those people are broken into two groups: half get the vaccine and half get a placebo. Then they're sent out to live their lives while scientists monitor whether or not they get COVID-19 over several months. In the trial for Pfizer-BioNTech, for example, there were 43,000 participants. In the end, 170 people were infected with COVID-19. And how those people fall into each of these groups determines a vaccine's efficacy. If the 170 were evenly split, that would mean you're just as likely to get sick with the vaccine as without it, so it would have a 0% efficacy. If all 170 were in the placebo group and 0 people who got the vaccine were sick, the vaccine would have an efficacy of 100%. With this particular trial, there were 162 in the placebo group and just 8 in the vaccine group. It means those who had the vaccine were 95% less likely to get COVID-19. The vaccine had a 95% efficacy. Now, this doesn't mean if 100 people are vaccinated, 5 of them will get sick. Instead, that 95% number applies to the individual. So each vaccinated person is 95% less likely than a person without a vaccine to get sick each time they're exposed to COVID-19. And every vaccine's efficacy rate is calculated in the same way. But each vaccine's trial might be done in very different circumstances.
So one of the biggest considerations here when we look at these numbers is the timing in which these clinical trials were performed.
This is the number of daily COVID-19 cases in the US since the pandemic began. The Moderna trial was done completely in the US, here in the summer. The Pfizer-BioNTech trial was primarily based in the US too, and at the same time. Johnson & Johnson, however, held their US trial at this time, when there were more opportunities for participants to be exposed to infections. And most of their trial took place in other countries, primarily South Africa and Brazil. And in these other countries, not only were case rates high, but the virus itself was different. The trials took place as variants of COVID-19 emerged and became dominant infections in these countries, variants that are more likely to get participants sick. In South Africa, most of the cases in the Johnson & Johnson trial were that of the variant, not the original strain that was in the US over the summer. And despite that, it still significantly reduced infections.
If you're trying to make one-to-one, head-to-head comparisons between vaccines, they need to have been studied in the same trial with the same inclusion criteria in the same parts of the world at the same time.
If we were to take Pfizer and Moderna's vaccine and redo their clinical trial at the same time that we did J&J's clinical trial, we might see quite different efficacy numbers for those.
These efficacy numbers really just tell you what happened in each vaccine's trial, not exactly what will happen in the real world. But many experts argue this isn't even the best number to judge a vaccine by anyway, because preventing any infection at all is not always the point of a vaccine.
The goal of a vaccine program for COVID-19 is not necessarily to get to COVID-0, but it's to tame this virus, to defang it, to remove its ability to cause serious disease, hospitalization, and death.
It helps to look at the different outcomes of an exposure to COVID-19 like this. The best case scenario is you don't get sick at all. The worst case is death. In between, there's being hospitalized, severe to moderate symptoms, or having no symptoms at all. In the absolute best circumstances, vaccines give you protection all the way to here. But realistically, that isn't the main objective of COVID-19 vaccines. The real purpose is to give your body enough protection to cover these possibilities. So if you do get an infection, it feels more like a cold than something you'd be hospitalized for. And this is one thing that every one of these COVID-19 vaccines do well. In all these trials, while some people in the placebo groups were hospitalized or even died from COVID-19, not one fully vaccinated person in any of these trials was hospitalized or died from COVID-19.
One thing that I wish that Mayor would have understood was that all 3 vaccines have essentially 100% effectiveness in protecting from death.
The mayor of Detroit did backtrack and said he'd start taking Johnson & Johnson doses. because it's still highly effective against what we care about most. Efficacy matters, but it doesn't matter the most. The question isn't which vaccine will protect you from any COVID infection, but which one will keep you alive or out of the hospital? Which one will help end the pandemic? And that's any of them.
The best vaccine right now for you is the one that you're offered.
With each shot that goes in someone's arm, we get closer to the end of this pandemic.
Very good, Georgi. Well, this is all for today. Guys, follow us on BMG and Forbes.g and take care.
Have a great working week ahead. We'll meet on Sunday again. See you.